Well now, ain't this something? I reckon you weren't expecting a big old balloon to float up to your doorstep today. But here I am, sitting right in your front yard, like it's the most natural thing in the world. Now, don't worry none. I'm not here to rush you. Got all the time in the world. But here's my question for you. You want to come on up? Got plenty of room in here. Ain't no hurry to decide. But if you do decide to tag along, well, I'll tell you. The view up here is something you don't get from standing on the ground. You just step on in, and we'll go wherever the wind takes us. See, the thing about balloons is they're patient. They don't fight to get anywhere. They just rise, easy as breathing. So, if you're feeling like floating for a while, just hop on in, and I'll take care of the rest. Now, I know what you're thinking. You got things to do, responsibilities and all that. But this ain't about leaving everything behind for good. No, sir. We're just getting away for a little while, a break. You know, like when you sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and just watch the world spin on by. We'll be back before you know it. But up here, there's no rush to come down. See, sometimes you just gotta let go for a bit. Let yourself float above it all. Not forever, just long enough to catch your breath. And when we touch back down, everything's still gonna be there, right where you left it. Only difference is, you'll feel a little lighter. Note too, this ain't your typical balloon. Sure, it floats like one, but it's got a mind of its own sometimes. Takes us places a regular balloon just wouldn't think to go. And, well, we may soon not be in Kansas anymore, as that old saying goes. Might start out with a quiet little trip, just up above the rooftops. But I wouldn't be surprised if we end up somewhere a little unexpected. Could be above the clouds, or maybe even beyond them. Yeah, I told you this wasn't your typical balloon. Still have to return that satellite antenna I knocked into the other day. Anyway, it's your choice completely. But I would say, take it from someone with some experience. If I were you, I'd just let her take you where she wants to. Nothing to be afraid of. It's like stepping into a dream for a little while, and you can always come back whenever you like. I think we both know you've already made up your mind. Now, it's only a matter of your feet following. Come on aboard. There you go. Knew you'd step in sooner or later. Now, just lean back and let the wind do the heavy lifting. No need to hold on too tight. Just let it do its thing. See, sometimes you just gotta let go for a bit. Let yourself float above it all. Not forever, just long enough to catch your breath, and when we touch back down, everything's still gonna be there, right where you left it. Only difference is, you'll feel a little lighter. We're not heading too far, just far enough to give your mind some space. It's good for the soul, I promise you that. Don't worry none. Remember when I said this wasn't your ordinary balloon? We couldn't crash this thing if we tried. Here, you're free to feel safer than you ever were on the ground. Just rest yourself, relax plenty, and let your mind go up in the clouds, because that's exactly where we'll be before we know it. Speaking of, would you look at that? Look down. We're about eye level with a giraffe right now. If one of those long-necked fellas was here, we'd be looking him straight in the eye. Funny thing about giraffes, they don't rush neither. They just move at their own pace, taking their time, looking at the world from up high. You ever notice how they don't seem bothered by anything? Just moving through life, nice and steady, like they know something we don't. Maybe that's the lesson, huh? Being a little more like them. Tall and calm, not letting the small stuff get to you. Just taking a good long look around before deciding on your next step. You'll get where you're going soon enough. Things are always clearer from up high. Now, while we're hanging up here with the giraffes, let me tell you something kind of neat. You know how their hearts have to work a little harder than most animals. Being that tall means they need extra power to pump blood all the way up to that big old brain of theirs. It's something like double the blood pressure of a human, but they handle it like it's nothing. Just goes to show, when you're built for it, even the hardest tasks can seem easy. Same goes for us, I reckon. We might think we're carrying more than we can handle, but the truth is, you are stronger than you know. Built for the path you're walking. Sure, some days it feels heavy, but you've got what it takes to keep going. Just like a giraffe. Head held high, moving through life's savanna without a care in the world. Speaking of savannas, there's trees in them too, but they ain't quite like the ones we're looking at with these pines. Funny how high we are, and yet those trees still have a way of reaching up to the sky, don't they? Just like us, they're always trying to grow taller, reaching for the light. Pine trees have been around for a long time, about 150 million years, based on fossil evidence, they say. They've weathered storms, fires, and everything in between, and still stand tall. They teach us about resilience, how to bend but not break. Just like those trees, we can endure a lot and still keep growing, keep reaching for what we want in life. And here's a little tidbit. The seeds of those pines are stored in their cones, and they can stay dormant for years until the conditions are just right for them to sprout. It's like they know there's a perfect time to come alive. Makes you think, huh? Sometimes we need to trust our own timing. Just because things feel still doesn't mean they're not growing beneath the surface. Part of why pine trees are like that is thanks to a little process called serotiny. You see, some pine cones are closed tight and won't open until they're actually exposed to fire. So flames sweep through a forest during a forest fire. They clear out the underbrush, and those cones pop open, releasing their seeds into the often nutrient-rich soil left behind. It's like Mother Nature's way of making sure that life can start anew, even after a big old fire. The trees just know when to let go and trust that the right conditions will come along. Isn't that something? Just like in our lives, sometimes we have to go through some tough stuff before we can grow again. And it's that very struggle that makes us stronger and allows us to thrive, to grow. I wonder if that's where humans got the idea of one day going up in the sky. It was like the trees were inviting us, or maybe taunting us, Look at us up here, floating above it all. You think you can do it too? It's like that call to adventure was always there, waiting for someone brave enough to take the leap. Now, thinking back to some of first who tried to do this, in Roman times, they had some wild ideas about flight. You ever heard of a fella named Archytas? He was quite the thinker back in ancient Greece, a philosopher and mathematician who dabbled in all sorts of fields. Some folks say he invented the first flying machine, a wooden pigeon that could actually fly. Now, it's a bit of a legend, but the story goes that he used steam power to make it soar. Can you imagine that? Now, If Archytas really did use steam power for his flying machine, that would mean he was way ahead of his time, long before we ever thought steam power was actually discovered. The first real use of steam engines didn't come until the 17th century, with inventors like Thomas Savery and later James Watt, who really got things rolling. That first steam engine, the one invented by Thomas Savery, was patented in 1698, and it was what he called the fire engine. Not quite like the engines we think of today, but a clever contraption designed to pump water out of mines. You see, back then, mines would fill up with water, and it made it tough for the miners to work. Savery's engine was one of the first attempts to harness steam to solve that problem. Savery's engine used steam pressure to create a vacuum, which would draw water up through a pipe. He'd heat water in a boiler, and when the steam formed, it would push against the water, making it rise. It was a groundbreaking idea at the time, and while it wasn't super efficient, it was a significant step in the right direction for steam technology. Now, it's important to remember that Savery's engine had its limitations. It could only lift water a short distance and was prone to all sorts of problems. But it paved the way for later inventors like James Watt, who would refine the idea and create a more efficient steam engine that really kicked the Industrial Revolution into high gear with the Watt engine. It's amazing to think that from those early experiments with steam, we eventually got the trains, ships, and even the planes we have today. All because someone dared to dream and take that first step. Just like Archytas with his flying pigeon, Savery's fire engine was a leap into the unknown, a spark that lit the way for future generations. Anyway, I'm getting all sidetracked here, talking about steam engines, when I meant to share more about those early flying machines. After Archytas, there were a whole bunch of dreamers who tried their hand at flight. You might be surprised to know that folks were experimenting with gliders long before powered flight came around. One of the most famous was a fella named Leonardo da Vinci. You probably know that guy most famously for the Da Vinci Code, that book and movie that got everyone buzzing about hidden secrets and codes in art. But let me tell you, he was so much more than that if you look into the history of it. He was a true Renaissance man, dabbling in painting, sculpting, science, anatomy, and, of course, engineering. That's what makes him such a fascinating figure. In the 15th century, he sketched out designs for all kinds of flying machines, including a flying machine that looked like a giant bird and a helicopter-like contraption. He called it the aerial screw. Can you imagine? This guy was envisioning things that wouldn't even take shape for hundreds of years to come. His sketches showed an understanding of aerodynamics that was way, way ahead of his time. So, while we're floating up here, let's take a moment to appreciate all those dreamers who dared to imagine a world beyond what they could see. They paved the way for us to explore not just the skies, but the very essence of what it means to be human. Always learning, always growing, and always reaching for the stars. So then, how did the first flying machine get invented? Most people think it was the Wright brothers with their planes, but the truth is, it didn't start with them, not by a long shot.